No one expected a bear cub to appear in their quiet courtyard, but when it didn't just bring curiosity, it brought hope, laughter, and a lesson in compassion that none of them would forget. The morning sun filtered gently through the tall windows of Evergreen Manor, painting long golden streaks across the polished floors. Birds chirped softly outside, and the faint hum of distant traffic reminded the residents that the world beyond the walls still existed. For the most part, mornings in the nursing home were predictable: breakfast trays carefully arranged, quiet conversations over coffee, and the occasional shuffle of walkers and canes along the hallways. It was a calm, almost timeless rhythm, until today when an unexpected visitor arrived. Margaret, sitting near the window with her knitting basket on her lap, noticed movement in the courtyard. At first, she assumed it was one of the maintenance staff late for their rounds. But as the figure came closer, her knitting needles paused mid-stitch. It was small, furry, and wobbly on tiny legs. A bear cub, no more than a few months old, had wandered through a gap in the fence and into the manicured garden. Its eyes, wide and glistening, scanned the space with a mix of curiosity and caution. Margaret's first instinct was fear. A bear? Here. In the middle of a suburban nursing home? She gasped, catching the attention of nearby residents. Some turned to see what had startled her. Mr. Thompson, who had lived at Evergreen Manor for 7 years and had a penchant for overdramatic exclamations, stood up quickly. Is that a bear?" he asked, his voice trembling between awe and panic. Sitting in her wheelchair near the courtyard entrance, Rosa squinted through the morning light. "It's just a cub," she whispered, almost as if saying it too loudly might anger it. But fear, she realized, was replaced by fascination. The cub's small frame, soft brown fur, and trembling paws invoked a strange tenderness, like a living stuffed animal that had decided to step into their lives. The nursing home staff scrambled. Nurse James, quick on his feet, stepped into the courtyard, arms outstretched, trying to gauge the situation without alarming the residents or the cub. "Everyone please stay calm," he said firmly. "Let's not scare it. It's probably lost and frightened." The cub, seemingly unfazed by human voices, padded slowly toward a patch of sunlight near the flower beds. Its nose twitched, sniffing the air as though trying to decode this new environment. Margaret found herself inching forward, a strange warmth spreading through her chest. She had spent years quietly observing life from her window, feeling isolated as old age and illness built invisible walls around her. And yet, here was this tiny creature, vulnerable, seeking comfort, entirely unaware of the difference between human and animal worlds. Soon, other residents gathered, their curiosity overtaking their initial trepidation. Some clutched the arms of their wheelchairs. Others leaned forward from nearby benches. They whispered to each other, comparing this moment to stories from their youth, of trips to national parks, childhood visits to the zoo, and the wild animals they had read about in books. The cub, in its innocence, became an unexpected bridge to memories long tucked away. Nurse James approached cautiously, bringing a small bowl of water. The cub paused, sniffed, and then, after a moment's hesitation, lapped at it carefully. Margaret, emboldened by its gentle behavior, suggested quietly, "Maybe we should leave some fruit as well, apples or perhaps a banana?" Her voice trembled, partly with fear, partly with excitement. The staff nodded, agreeing. A small tray was assembled, and the cub approached, sniffing each item with careful deliberation. As the minutes passed, the residents' initial fear gave way to quiet smiles. Conversations began to flow. Margaret shared memories of a family trip to the Rockies, Mr. Thompson spoke about his childhood fascination with bears, and Rosa mentioned the wildlife documentaries she used to watch with her late husband. The cub, blissfully unaware of its audience, explored the courtyard with gentle curiosity, occasionally stopping to nuzzle the flowers or paw at the grass. Yet beneath the surface, the staff understood the delicate nature of the situation. A bear, even a small one, was still a wild animal. The possibility of sudden panic, aggressive behavior, or an unpredictable escape loomed. Nurse James called the local animal rescue, explaining the situation while keeping one eye on the cub. Within the walls of Evergreen Manor, a subtle tension hung in the air, counterbalanced by awe and an emerging sense of community among the residents. Margaret found herself kneeling beside her wheelchair, holding out her hand. "Come here, little one," she whispered softly. For a long moment, the cub regarded her with those round, liquid eyes, hesitant yet drawn to the gentle invitation. Then, with careful steps, it came closer, brushing its nose against her fingers. A collective gasp swept through the courtyard, not of fear but of recognition. Something profound had occurred. In this tiny interaction, a connection had been made. "Look at that," Rosa murmured, a tear slipping down her cheek. It's like it knows we care." From the safety of his post, Nurse James observed the scene with mixed relief and wonder. The residents were engaged, active, and animated in a way he hadn't seen in weeks. The cub, a seemingly small and fragile creature, had ignited a spark of life and purpose within them. Margaret's knitting lay forgotten on the bench, her eyes locked on the bear as if she had found a companion and an unlikely teacher of empathy. Suddenly, a distant bark echoed from the street outside. The cub froze, ears pricked, and looked toward the sound. Margaret felt her heart skip. The moment of calm was fragile. Would the cub bolt? Could it react defensively? A part of her wanted to hold it close, to protect it from this sudden intrusion of the outside world. As the sun climbed higher, the courtyard transformed from a quiet, predictable place into a stage of curiosity, care, and tentative trust. The residents had discovered something unexpected, an opportunity to give, to nurture, and to witness life in its raw, innocent form. And as the cub looked around, sniffing, exploring, and inching closer to the flower beds again, they realized this was only the beginning of a story that none of them could have anticipated. But just as Nurse James signaled the animal rescue team, the cub's attention shifted sharply toward the back gate of the courtyard. Its ears twitched and it emitted a small, urgent whimper. Something, or someone, was approaching, and the peaceful morning was about to be interrupted. Who or what is approaching the cub, and how will the residents respond? If you were in the courtyard, would you try to protect the cub yourself, or wait for the professionals to arrive? What would you do differently? The whimper from the cub echoed faintly through the courtyard, blending with the soft rustle of leaves and distant traffic. Margaret's heart raced as she leaned slightly forward, her fingers twitching nervously. The cub's small frame stiffened, its little paws digging slightly into the grass. Nurse James instinctively moved closer, his hands raised, trying to maintain a calm presence. "Everyone, please stay calm," he murmured again, though his own voice betrayed a subtle tension. Margaret, Rosa, and a few other residents instinctively formed a small circle, not to trap the cub, but to create a protective barrier. The cub's eyes darted to the back gate, and Margaret realized it wasn't just a random noise, something was out there. A shadowy figure emerged, partially hidden behind a hedge. The cub let out a quiet, desperate cry. It was another bear, slightly larger, a golden-brown adult that moved with careful, deliberate steps. Margaret's breath caught. A mother bear? The residents' gasps mingled with murmurs of awe. For a moment, the courtyard seemed frozen in disbelief. Margaret's hands instinctively reached out again, though she knew this was no time to touch or interfere. The adult bear stopped just outside the courtyard fence, sniffing the air, clearly aware of its cub's presence. Its eyes scanned the humans carefully, then softened slightly upon seeing the cub safe. Rosa, clutching her cardigan, whispered, It's just checking on its baby. It means no harm." Margaret nodded, her fingers trembling as she realized the full significance of the scene. The cub, sensing the presence of its mother, hesitated for a moment, then scampered a few steps toward the flowers, pausing to look back at the humans. The courtyard had become an unlikely stage for a lesson in trust and coexistence. Nurse James signaled subtly to the staff to hold their positions. "No sudden movements," he instructed softly. "Let's give them space." The residents complied, though the mixture of fear and excitement made it difficult to remain still. Mr. Thompson, who had been pacing near the benches, suddenly sat down with a startled sigh. "I never thought I'd see something like this at my age," he muttered, half to himself, half to Margaret. Margaret smiled, though a flicker of worry remained. "It's beautiful, isn't it? How protective it is, how it watches over its little one." Rosa nodded, her eyes glistening. "It reminds me that care doesn't need words. That even without speech, love exists." Over the next few minutes, a tentative calm settled in. The mother bear stayed at the edge of the fence, watching attentively. The cub explored cautiously, sniffing the flower beds, nudging the small water bowl, and occasionally glancing back at the humans with wide, trusting eyes. Margaret reached slowly toward the cub again, this time letting her hand hover above the grass. The cub, as if sensing her intention, approached gingerly and brushed its nose lightly against her fingertips. A collective gasp escaped the group. "Look at that," Rosa said softly. "It trusts you." Margaret shook her head, unsure if she deserved such recognition. But the warmth spreading through her chest was undeniable. For the first time in months she felt truly connected, not just to the cub but to the other residents and even to the world outside the nursing home walls. The staff, quietly observing, realized that the cub's presence had unlocked something rare among the residents. Conversations began to flow naturally. Margaret recounted a childhood trip to the mountains, where she had seen bears from a safe distance, and how her father had taught her to respect their space. Mr. Thompson shared a story about a local wildlife rescue he had once volunteered for in his youth, describing how small acts of patience and observation could save an animal's life. Rosa, moved by the moment, spoke of her late husband and how they used to watch wildlife documentaries together, marveling at the simple elegance of nature. Even those residents who had initially remained silent began to smile, nod, and quietly comment on the cub's movements. The small courtyard was alive with human interaction, laughter, and stories, all sparked by the arrival of a tiny vulnerable bear. Nurse James noticed the change and felt a sense of awe. The cub, oblivious to the ripple effect it had caused, continued to explore, occasionally brushing against the flowers, sometimes pausing to observe a resident's hand or foot. But the tranquility was fragile. A sudden screech from the street startled the cub. It froze, ears twitching, and glanced at its mother, who had become slightly more alert. Nurse James instinctively stepped closer, though he knew he could do little if the cub panicked. Margaret, sensing his worry, leaned slightly forward. "It's okay, just breathe," she whispered, more to herself than to anyone else. The residents collectively held their breath, watching the tiny creature struggle between fear and curiosity. Then, unexpectedly, the cub did something remarkable. Instead of running blindly toward the gate or panicking, it returned to the flower beds, sniffing the tray of fruit placed earlier. It licked at the apple slices, then glanced back at Margaret. Her heart swelled. She realized the cub had made a choice. It trusted the humans in the courtyard enough to remain calm, even in the presence of potential danger. Rosa reached out, offering a gentle, encouraging smile. "See? It knows we're not here to hurt it." Margaret nodded, quietly amazed at the connection forming. Each resident had begun to understand the fragile balance between trust, caution, and empathy, a lesson delivered not in words, but in the silent actions of a bear cub. Minutes later, a soft rumble from the street signaled the arrival of a vehicle. The animal rescue team had reached the nursing home. Margaret's excitement mingled with worry. She knew the cub would be safe, but she also felt a pang of sadness at the thought of saying goodbye. Mr. Thompson murmured, "It's strange, we've all grown fond of it already." Rosa nodded, tears slipping down her cheeks. As the rescuers approached cautiously, the mother bear retreated slightly, keeping a watchful eye on her cub. The cub, sensing their presence, hesitated but did not panic. It looked around the courtyard, its gaze meeting each resident's eyes briefly, a silent acknowledgement of the bond that had formed over these few extraordinary hours. And then, just as one rescuer reached toward the cub, a sudden noise shattered the moment. A bicycle chain rattling sharply against the pavement outside the gate. The cub's ears pricked, its small body tensing, and it let out a soft, urgent whimper. The residents froze. Nurse James's hand shot up, signaling everyone to stay calm, but inside, the tension was palpable. What is the cub reacting to? Will it trust the rescuers or will chaos ensue in the courtyard? The rattling of the bicycle chain outside the nursing home gate hung in the air like a sudden crack of thunder. The cub froze mid-step, its small body trembling as it pressed itself closer to the flower beds. Margaret's heart skipped a beat, and even the seasoned staff felt their pulses quicken. Every pair of eyes in the courtyard turned toward the source of the noise, but it was barely visible beyond the tall hedges and wrought iron gate. Margaret instinctively reached toward the cub again, but Nurse James placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "Let it assess the situation first," he cautioned. "If we rush, it could panic." The cub sniffed the air, ears swiveling, tiny nose twitching, as though trying to decipher whether the noise meant danger. Margaret held her breath. Rosa, gripping the armrests of her wheelchair, whispered, "It's so small, yet so aware." The mother bear, positioned at the edge of the fence, let out a low, cautious growl, not threatening but alert. It was a protective warning, signaling the cub to be cautious. Margaret felt a shiver run down her spine. She realized how fragile this balance was. A single sudden movement, a careless word, or the wrong gesture could trigger chaos. Then the cub did something extraordinary. Instead of bolting toward the gate or curling into a defensive ball, it retreated a few steps and pressed against the flowerbed's taller plants. It glanced at Margaret again, its dark eyes seemingly seeking reassurance. The message was clear: "I trust you, help me." Margaret's fingers hovered, trembling, before she finally placed them gently on the cub's soft fur. The warmth that radiated from the small body was startling. It was a living, breathing bundle of courage and vulnerability. The staff slowly formed a semicircle, trying to maintain distance while providing a sense of safety. Nurse James kept his voice low, issuing soft instructions. Everyone stay calm. Move slowly. Speak softly. Let it see we're not a threat. Mr. Thompson, who had been pacing nervously, muttered, I never thought I'd be giving instructions to people and a bear at the same time. Rosa chuckled quietly, a sound that eased the tension slightly. The cub took a cautious step forward, then paused again. Its gaze flicked toward the gate, where the chain rattled once more. Margaret could feel her own pulse in sync with the cub's. This was a test of trust, a delicate negotiation between instinct, fear, and reliance on the humans who had so far shown care instead of harm. Minutes passed, each stretching longer than the last. The cub sniffed the air again and slowly inched toward the tray of fruit placed earlier. It licked at a slice of apple before pausing, ears twitching toward the sound outside. Margaret whispered softly, It's okay, nothing's going to hurt you here. She felt a mix of relief and awe as the cub finally took another tentative bite. Rosa's eyes filled with tears, and even Mr. Thompson had stopped fidgeting, captivated by the tiny creature's delicate movements. The mother bear remained vigilant, her posture rigid, yet non-aggressive. She paced slightly behind the fence, eyes never leaving her cub. Margaret realized that even in this urban, semi-enclosed courtyard, natural instincts thrived. The bears were not tamed, they were cautious, intelligent, and aware. They had entered a human-dominated environment, yet their presence commanded respect, awe, and a profound sense of humility. Suddenly a shadow moved near the gate. Margaret froze and the cub's body stiffened again. It let out a small, urgent whimper, glancing at its mother, then back at the humans. The staff tightened the semicircle around the cub, giving it room while subtly guiding residents to stay seated. The moment was tense. Every breath seemed amplified, every sound magnified. Then the cause of the disturbance revealed itself. A neighborhood dog, unleashed and curious, had wandered close to the gate. Its barking and erratic movements triggered the cub's caution. Margaret exhaled slowly, relief washing over her, but the cub's reaction underscored a lesson. In moments of perceived danger, trust is fragile and vigilance is necessary. Nurse James whispered, Good, it didn't bolt. That's progress. The cub paused once more, sniffing the air, and then, after a few careful steps, returned fully to the tray of fruit. Margaret reached out again, this time gently stroking its fur along the back. The warmth radiating from the small body seemed to seep into the hearts of everyone present. The residents, once quiet and reserved, began to talk softly to each other, sharing stories, observations, and quiet laughter. Margaret noticed subtle changes in the other residents. Harold, a retired schoolteacher who had been largely withdrawn for months, reached over to offer a small hand toward the cub, speaking softly in encouragement. Rosa's smile widened as she leaned forward slightly, and even Mr. Thompson, with his dramatic flair, lowered his voice to murmur a story about a bear he had seen in Yellowstone decades ago. Each interaction, no matter how small, built a bridge of empathy, patience, and mutual respect. Meanwhile, the mother bear shifted slightly, walking along the edge of the fence. Margaret understood instinctively that she was monitoring not only the cub but the humans as well. There was a lesson here, subtle and profound. The bear's trust had to be earned, just as the humans' trust in their own courage had to be reaffirmed. Hours seemed to pass in this delicate dance. The cub nibbled cautiously, explored the flower beds, and occasionally returned to the humans for quiet reassurance. Margaret found herself kneeling beside her wheelchair, hands outstretched, silently communicating, It's okay. We're here. We care. The cub responded in kind, brushing against her fingers, sniffing softly, and occasionally looking toward its mother. But even as the courtyard blossomed with connection, a new tension began to surface. One of the residents, an elderly man named George, noticed a gap in the far side of the fence, a small area that the mother bear could easily cross if startled. He whispered urgently to Nurse James, who quickly acknowledged the risk. While everyone had grown fond of the cub and mother bear, reality reminded them that wild instincts were unpredictable. The animal rescue team, meanwhile, had arrived fully and was preparing to intervene. They set up barriers and began discussing the safest approach. Margaret, sensing the cub's growing trust in the humans around it, feared that intervention might disrupt this delicate balance. Rosa leaned closer to her. Do you think it will be okay? She asked softly. Margaret could only shake her head slightly, unsure of how to reassure anyone, including herself. And then, just as the sun reached its zenith, the cub's ears twitched violently. A sharp, Piercing cry came from beyond the courtyard, louder, more urgent than the earlier bicycle chain. The cub froze, its little body stiff, eyes wide, and it scampered a few steps backward toward the flower beds. Margaret felt her stomach clench. The mother bear growled softly, stepping closer to the fence in protective response. What danger lies beyond the courtyard now, and how will the cub, its mother, and the nursing home residents respond to this sudden heightened threat? If a sudden danger appeared near a vulnerable animal you were caring for, would you try to protect it yourself or wait for experts? How would you handle the fear and responsibility? The sudden cry beyond the courtyard still echoed faintly, vibrating through the walls of Evergreen Manor like a warning bell. Margaret's hands shook as she reached again toward the cub, whose small body quivered with apprehension. Its tiny paws dug into the soft grass, and its dark eyes darted toward the gate, then back at the humans. For a brief moment, it seemed frozen, caught between instinctual fear and the emerging trust it had built over the morning. Nurse James signaled to the staff to hold their positions. No sudden movements. Speak softly. Everyone stay seated or behind the barrier, he instructed, his voice calm but tense. Margaret nodded, her gaze fixed on the cub. The residents, though visibly anxious, obeyed, their eyes wide, hearts racing, yet captivated by the delicate interaction unfolding before them. Margaret noticed the mother bear pacing at the edge of the fence, her movements precise, protective. Each step seemed deliberate, an instinctual calculation of potential danger and the safety of her cub. Margaret realized how deeply these creatures were attuned to their surroundings, how every twitch, glance, and subtle movement carried weight. The courtyard, once calm, had transformed into a living lesson about vigilance, courage, and trust. The cub, sensing the intensity of the situation, let out a soft whimper. Margaret whispered soothingly, "It's okay, we're here. You're safe." The words barely left her lips, yet the cub responded, taking a tentative step toward the flower beds again. Its trust in the humans had not wavered completely, even in the face of sudden danger. Meanwhile, the residents began to act. Rosa, leaning slightly forward in her wheelchair, offered the cub a gentle smile, speaking softly, "We'll help you." Margaret saw that the cub's ears twitched as if understanding the reassurance. Even Mr. Thompson, usually dramatic and overcautious, found himself quietly speaking to the creature. "Just breathe, it's okay." His tone carried a surprising steadiness, a reflection of the bond forming between human and animal. Nurse James turned to the animal rescue team, who had positioned themselves cautiously at the courtyard's edge. "We need to guide it without spooking either bear," he said quietly. The team nodded, moving slowly, their eyes fixed on the cub while maintaining a respectful distance. The cub's mother remained at the fence, her gaze unwavering, muscles tense, yet she did not charge. It was a display of raw, instinctual intelligence. A reminder that even wild animals can act with patience and deliberation. Margaret, despite the fear gripping her chest, felt a strange surge of courage. She had spent years quietly observing life, often feeling invisible, isolated, and disconnected. Now, in the presence of this small creature, she realized that her actions mattered. Each word, each gesture, each careful step she took had meaning. She reached out slowly, fingers hovering just above the cub's head, willing it to trust her, willing it to remain calm. The cub hesitated, then nuzzled her fingers lightly. Margaret exhaled a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. The residents around her exchanged quiet glances, a shared recognition passing between them, that this small creature had united them in courage, patience, and empathy. But the courtyard's fragile equilibrium was still threatened. The source of the earlier noise drew closer. The shadow beyond the gate moved more distinctly now, revealing itself as a delivery van mistakenly approaching the area where the cub and mother bear were located. The van's driver honked lightly, unaware of the delicate situation unfolding inside the courtyard. The cub froze, ears swiveling, then scurried instinctively behind a low flower bed, its small frame pressing into the foliage. Margaret's heart pounded. Nurse James whispered to the rescue team, "We need to get the van stopped before the cub panics." One of the team members radioed the driver, but the signal was faint, and the van continued inching closer. The residents tensed, their collective anxiety reflected in wide, focused eyes. Margaret realized that everyone's presence, calm voices, gentle gestures, and shared patience, had given the cub a buffer against fear, but this new development could undo hours of trust in a matter of seconds. Suddenly George, the resident who had noticed the gap in the fence earlier, acted instinctively. He leaned slightly forward, speaking in a firm, measured voice. "Hey, Ben, stop there. There's an animal in the courtyard." His words, though not professional, carried authority and urgency. The van slowed, brakes squealing slightly, giving the rescue team just enough time to intervene. Margaret marveled at George's quick thinking. An elderly man, long considered reserved and timid, now a decisive presence in the midst of crisis. The cub, sensing the change, relaxed slightly. Its ears still twitched, but it returned cautiously to the flower beds, sniffing and lapping at the water. Margaret reached out again, allowing it to brush against her hand. The connection between human and animal, fragile yet resilient, had endured the first true test. Residents began to engage more actively, offering quiet encouragement to the cub. Margaret suggested placing a few more fruit slices on the tray, spreading them out so the cub could approach safely without feeling trapped. Rosa helped move a small flower pot, creating a gentle barrier that would prevent the cub from dashing straight toward the gate if startled. Mr. Thompson, surprisingly calm, narrated the scene in a hushed voice as if speaking directly to the cub. "You're safe here. Take your time." The mother bear meanwhile watched silently, her gaze sharp and protective. Margaret realized the cub's behavior was not only influenced by the humans but also by its mother's presence. The animal's instincts combined with the residents' gentle interventions had created a delicate balance, a dance of trust, patience, and mutual respect. Hours seemed to pass in this quiet, tense, yet mesmerizing rhythm. The cub explored the courtyard further, sometimes pausing to sniff Margaret's hand, other times investigating the flower beds or cautiously approaching the water bowl. The residents, once quiet and reserved, now shared stories of past encounters with animals, moments of courage and memories of family and youth. Laughter, soft and warm, mingled with the occasional gasp of awe as the cub moved gracefully around the space. But the tension remained. The van had finally backed away, leaving only the memory of potential danger. Margaret knew this was only a temporary reprieve. The cub and its mother remained wild creatures, and the residents' bond, though powerful, could be tested again at any moment. As the sun began its descent, casting long shadows across the courtyard, the cub paused near the center, looking up at Margaret and Rosa. Its dark eyes held an almost human-like intelligence, a silent acknowledgement of trust and care. Margaret felt tears prick at the corners of her eyes. This small, vulnerable creature had done more than wander into their lives. It had reignited courage, compassion, and connection in a place that had grown quiet with routine and isolation. Just as the residents began to relax, a sudden noise from the nursing home's main entrance echoed across the courtyard. The automatic door swung open unexpectedly and footsteps approached. Who is coming, and how will the cub and its mother react to this new presence? The automatic doors of Evergreen Manor creaked open, and footsteps echoed through the hallways before spilling into the courtyard. The cub froze instantly, ears pinned back and its tiny body lowered to the grass. Its mother stiffened at the fence, growling softly but cautiously, protective yet non-aggressive. Margaret's heart leapt. She knew this new presence could disrupt the delicate trust that had been painstakingly built over the morning. Through the doorway emerged a young delivery woman, holding a package tightly in her hands. She had entered the courtyard without realizing the cub's presence, distracted by her route and the task at hand. The cub's whimper reached Margaret's ears and she instinctively leaned forward, hands outstretched. "It's okay, stay calm," she whispered, more to the cub than to anyone else. Rosa, too, moved gently in her wheelchair, offering a soft smile, a gesture of reassurance. The cub's little paws shuffled nervously, stepping back toward the flower beds. Its mother, sensing the cub's unease, took a few careful steps along the fence, muscles taut but restrained. Margaret noticed the tension in the courtyard. The residents' concern was palpable, the staff tense, and the delivery woman frozen mid-step, wide-eyed at the sight before her. Nurse James quickly moved toward the young woman, speaking in a calm but firm tone. "Please stay where you are and do not make sudden movements. There's a bear in the courtyard. It's not dangerous if you remain calm." The delivery woman nodded, her hands trembling slightly as she clutched the package closer to her chest. She took a hesitant step backward, eyes locked on the small cub. Margaret realized this moment was critical. The cub's trust in humans had been nurtured over hours, and any sudden, panicked reaction could shatter it. She leaned further forward, fingers hovering gently above the cub's back. The cub hesitated, then brushed against her hand, a delicate acknowledgement that it still trusted the humans it had come to recognize as gentle and safe. The residents, too, responded in subtle but meaningful ways. Rosa's soft words, quiet, patient, soothing, reached the cub's sensitive ears. "You're safe here," she murmured. Margaret noticed how each resident's calm presence reinforced the cub's sense of security, their combined empathy creating an invisible shield against fear. Mr. Thompson, usually dramatic, lowered his voice to a soft hum, narrating the scene to himself and the cub, grounding it with familiarity and rhythm. The mother bear watched closely, her protective instincts engaged but tempered by observation. She seemed to understand that these humans had not caused harm to her cub, that their presence, though unusual, was careful and deliberate. Margaret realized this was more than a moment of connection. It was a lesson in understanding, patience, and mutual respect. The mother bear's restraint mirrored the human's empathy, a silent exchange of trust between species. Minutes passed in tense quiet. The cub nibbled at the apple slices, occasionally glancing toward Margaret and Rosa. The delivery woman, still frozen in place, finally exhaled a shaky breath. Nurse James guided her gently to the side, speaking softly about remaining still and calm, ensuring she did not startle the cub further. The courtyard seemed to hold its collective breath, the fragile equilibrium maintained by careful observation, empathy, and patience. Margaret, kneeling beside her wheelchair, felt a surge of pride and wonder. The cub had brought out courage and attentiveness in the residents, qualities that had lain dormant for months, perhaps even years. George, the observant resident who had earlier noticed the fence gap, whispered to Nurse James, "They're teaching us more than we're teaching them, aren't they?" James nodded, realizing how true that was. This tiny creature had reminded them of patience, awareness, and the profound effect of gentle guidance. As the delivery woman slowly moved backward toward the door, the cub finally relaxed its stance slightly, sniffing the air with cautious curiosity. Margaret reached out once more, allowing the small animal to nuzzle her hand. A soft, almost imperceptible rumble emanated from the mother bear, but it was not aggression. It was communication, a signal that the humans were acceptable, that the cub's trust had not been broken. Rosa glanced around at the residents, noting how each had engaged in small acts of care, speaking softly, staying calm, and moving deliberately. Even Mr. Thompson, seated firmly on his bench, kept his voice low and steady. Margaret realized that the cub's presence had transformed the courtyard into a space of mutual learning. Humans and bears, each cautious and vulnerable in their own way, were negotiating trust, empathy, and understanding together. The animal rescue team remained in position, preparing to intervene only if necessary. They observed the cub's behavior, noting its cautious approach to the tray of fruit, its glances toward Margaret and the residents, and its responses to the mother's protective signals. This was a living lesson in careful observation, patience, and the subtleties of trust between species. The delivery woman finally withdrew fully, her footsteps light and controlled. Margaret exhaled, relief mingling with lingering adrenaline. The cub, seemingly reassured, returned to the center of the courtyard, sniffing at the ground and brushing against the tray of fruit. The mother bear, still alert at the fence, allowed the cub this brief moment of calm. Margaret realized that the bond forged over these hours had survived the test. Not perfectly, perhaps, but resiliently. Even as the cub explored, a deeper understanding settled over the residents. Margaret, Rosa, George, and even Mr. Thompson recognized that their actions had tangible consequences. They had learned to communicate across species, to manage fear with calmness, and to act with intention rather than panic. The courtyard, once just a quiet morning space, had become a living classroom of empathy, courage, and connection. And yet, just as the residents began to breathe a little easier, a sudden movement caught Margaret's eye near the hedge at the far corner of the courtyard. Something shifted in the shadows, subtle but distinct. The cub's ears twitched and it glanced sharply toward the movement. Its mother stiffened, growling softly but with intent. Margaret felt a familiar tension grip her chest. This new presence was unknown, and the cub's instincts reacted immediately. The courtyard fell silent. Residents froze, fingers gripping armrests, eyes wide. Nurse James raised his hands, signaling calm, but internally he braced for the unexpected. Margaret leaned slightly forward, hands hovering over the cub, whispering softly, "It's okay, stay calm. We're here." The cub pressed closer to the flower beds, muscles taut but controlled, a creature balancing fear with trust. What is lurking in the shadows of the courtyard? Will the cub and its mother face a real threat, and how will the residents respond to this sudden tension? If a new and unexpected presence appeared while you were caring for a vulnerable animal, would you intervene immediately or observe first? How would you maintain trust while addressing potential danger? The courtyard, bathed in the warm glow of late afternoon sunlight, suddenly felt colder. A subtle rustle near the far hedge had caught the cub's attention, and its tiny body stiffened. Margaret's heart skipped. The mother bear's low growl resonated through the air, a primal signal of alertness, echoing the cub's tension. Residents leaned slightly forward in their chairs and wheelchairs, holding their breaths as every eye strained to see the source of the disturbance. From the shadows of the hedge, a small raccoon emerged. Its black mask-like markings and twitching nose initially startled everyone. The cub froze, ears pinned, muscles tense. The mother bear stiffened as well, though she did not step forward aggressively. Margaret exhaled slowly, relief mingled with awe. It wasn't a real threat, but the scene had reminded everyone how quickly trust could be tested. The raccoon, apparently curious and emboldened by the quiet courtyard, approached the flower beds. Its small movements were quick, light, and unpredictable. The cub hesitated, sniffing the air and glancing back at Margaret as though silently asking, "What now?" Margaret remained kneeling, hand extended gently. "It's okay, just a visitor," she whispered softly. Rosa, watching closely, mirrored Margaret's tone, speaking in low, soothing words. The raccoon, sensing neither immediate danger nor overt hostility, explored cautiously. It sniffed at the scattered fruit on the tray and briefly glanced toward the cub before retreating slightly. The mother bear's growl softened, though she remained alert, her posture protective yet composed. The cub, encouraged by the human's calm demeanor, stepped forward carefully, brushing against Margaret's hand before investigating the flower beds. Margaret noticed subtle changes in the residents' expressions. Initially tense, they now watched with fascination and relief, observing how the cub navigated a small challenge without panic. Mr. Thompson, always eager to narrate, whispered in awe, "Even a little raccoon can test trust, and see how strong courage can be." George nodded, adding quietly, "It's teaching patience. We can't rush nature and neither can we rush trust." As the raccoon continued its brief exploration, the cub's confidence grew. It licked at the water bowl, then cautiously approached the fruit tray again. Margaret could feel a profound sense of connection flowing between them, a bond that had endured multiple tests in just a few hours. The residents, too, began to relax, though their eyes never left the cub or its mother. Every gesture, every movement held meaning, reinforcing lessons of empathy, patience, and care. The delivery woman, now fully aware of the cub's presence, watched silently from the doorway. She had never encountered such a delicate interplay between humans and wild animals. Nurse James whispered gently to her, "Notice how the cub responds to calm, patient humans. This is trust built slowly." She nodded, her eyes reflecting awe and a new understanding. For a brief moment, everything seemed serene. The cub explored gently, the raccoon eventually scuttled back toward the hedge, and the mother bear remained watchful but relaxed. The residents exchanged quiet smiles, a collective sense of achievement and connection passing through the courtyard. Margaret felt a warmth in her chest, a mixture of relief, pride, and awe at how this tiny creature had brought them all together. But nature's lessons are rarely without complexity. Suddenly, a distant siren wailed from the street beyond the gate. The cub froze instantly, ears swiveling, its body tensing once again. The mother bear's muscles rippled under her fur, and her gaze swept the courtyard with heightened alertness. Margaret instinctively leaned toward the cub, fingers hovering gently over its head, whispering, "It's okay, stay calm." Rosa echoed her, her voice soft and soothing. The residents felt the tension spike once more. Even Mr. Thompson, narrating the scene, lowered his tone as if the cub could sense the anxiety in human voices. The rescue team, observing, remained poised, ready to intervene if necessary. The cub's reaction to the siren highlighted the fragility of trust. Hours of careful interaction could be tested in a single instant. Margaret realized that this was the moment to reinforce patience and calmness, both for the cub and for the residents. She motioned slowly toward the flower beds, encouraging the cub to remain near the familiar, safe space. The cub, sensing the guidance, cautiously moved closer, brushing gently against her hand. Rosa added quiet words of encouragement, and even George softly hummed a tune, an unconscious attempt to stabilize the atmosphere. The siren passed, fading into the distance. The cub relaxed slightly, though its ears remained alert. Margaret felt a wave of relief, realizing that their combined patience and empathy had sustained the bond. The mother bear, after a few moments of vigilance, stepped back along the fence, allowing the cub to explore freely once again. As the afternoon shadows lengthened, the residents began to reflect on the day's events. Margaret noticed how they had transformed. Quiet, reserved individuals had demonstrated courage, patience, and empathy. They had learned that trust is delicate, requires vigilance, and rewards those willing to act with care. The cub, in its small, unassuming way, had become both teacher and catalyst for this transformation. Rosa leaned toward Margaret, whispering, "It's remarkable how much they teach us even without words." Margaret nodded, her gaze on the cub, which now investigated a small patch of wildflowers near the edge of the courtyard. "Yes," she whispered, "and how much we can teach them, about patience, kindness, and understanding." Suddenly, a noise from the nursing home's kitchen door echoed faintly, a tray clattered against the counter, and the sound carried across the courtyard. The cub's ears twitched and it froze mid-step, glancing toward the source. The mother bear's posture shifted slightly, muscles tensing. The residents, sensing a new potential disruption, instinctively leaned closer together, forming a unified presence of calm and reassurance. What is behind the kitchen door? Will it disrupt the cub's trust once again, or will the residents' calm and careful presence continue to guide the cub through another test? The cub paused mid-step, ears twitching, eyes wide. A sudden noise had echoed from the nursing home's kitchen door, a tray clattering followed by the low murmur of voices. Margaret's chest tightened as she instinctively leaned closer to the cub, fingers hovering protectively. The mother bear stiffened at the fence, muscles taut, watching the courtyard with the intensity of a creature that understood danger could come in many forms. The residents held their breath. Rosa leaned slightly forward in her wheelchair, whispering, "Stay calm, it's okay." Margaret mirrored her tone, soft and steady. The cub's little paws shifted hesitantly, sniffing the air. Its dark eyes darted from Margaret to the kitchen door, and then back to the mother bear. Margaret realized that this was a critical moment. How the cub would respond now could determine whether the trust they had built would endure yet another test. From the kitchen doorway emerged a young cook, carrying a small stack of dishes. He had not realized the cub was wandering nearby. The cub froze, huddling slightly near the flower beds, pressed low to the ground. The mother bear growled softly, a low warning that vibrated through the air but did not escalate into aggression. Margaret exhaled slowly, urging the cub with her calm presence. "It's safe, you're okay." The cook froze mid-step, noticing the cub and the mother bear. His eyes widened in shock, but he didn't make any sudden movements. Margaret noticed that the cub's trust in the humans, reinforced over hours, seemed to guide its reaction. It didn't run blindly, it observed, processed, and relied on the humans who had been patient, gentle, and protective. Rosa whispered to the cook, guiding him softly, "Step back slowly. No sudden movements. Speak gently if you must." The cook nodded, realizing that panic or haste would only frighten the cub. Margaret reached a hand out, letting the cub brush against her fingers, a small gesture of reassurance. The cub's muscles relaxed fractionally, its ears flicking toward the cook but not flattening in fear. Nurse James, sensing the delicate balance, instructed the staff and residents, "Let's maintain calm. Give the cub space and stay seated. Encourage gently without startling." George, always observant, added quietly, "It's amazing how quickly trust can be tested and how patience sustains it." Margaret nodded, understanding that the events of the day were more than just caretaking. They were lessons in empathy, composure, and responsibility. The cub, emboldened by Margaret and Rosa's steady presence, took a cautious step toward the tray of fruit. Its dark eyes flicked briefly toward the kitchen door, then returned to the humans beside it. The mother bear, standing alert but not aggressive, allowed the cub this space. Margaret realized that trust is a living, delicate process. It must be constantly nurtured, especially when the world introduces surprises. The young cook, moving slowly and deliberately, set the tray of dishes down on a nearby counter outside the cub's immediate path. His movements were careful, almost reverent, acknowledging the fragile harmony of the courtyard. The cub, reassured, licked at a small piece of apple, glancing intermittently at Margaret and the residents. Margaret felt a surge of pride. The cub had not panicked, and the mother bear's watchful presence reinforced the sense of safety. Rosa whispered to Margaret, "It's like they understand our intent, not just our words." Margaret nodded, realizing that the cub and its mother were reading the human's body language, tone, and gestures as much as anything else. The courtyard had become a space of mutual teaching, humans learning patience, empathy, and vigilance. The cub learning trust, safety, and subtle negotiation of its environment. As the afternoon sun dipped lower, casting long, warm shadows across the courtyard, Margaret observed small, quiet victories. The cub explored the flower beds, occasionally brushing against her hand or Rosa's sleeve, demonstrating that the connection they had fostered was resilient but carefully maintained. The mother bear remained at the fence, protective but non-confrontational, a living embodiment of trust and cautious guidance. The residents, inspired by the cub's composed behavior, began to interact with each other more freely. Soft laughter, gentle conversation, and shared observations about the cub's behavior filled the courtyard. Even Mr. Thompson, usually dramatic, whispered stories of past encounters with wildlife, grounding them in calm observation rather than excitement. Margaret realized how transformative this experience had been. A tiny creature had revitalized human connection, empathy, and courage. Yet the day was not yet over. As Margaret bent slightly to offer a hand to the cub, she noticed movement near the far corner of the courtyard, subtle, almost imperceptible. The cub's ears twitched sharply, and it glanced toward the movement, muscles coiled for action. The mother bear's stance stiffened, her gaze sweeping the courtyard with intense focus. Margaret felt a familiar tension tighten her chest. The cub's world, though mostly calm, remained fragile, susceptible to the smallest disruptions. What is approaching the far corner of the courtyard, and will the cub's trust in the humans and its mother's guidance hold steady in the face of this new presence? The subtle movement near the far corner of the courtyard grew clearer, casting a flicker of tension over the residents and staff alike. The cub froze instantly, ears twitching, eyes wide, muscles coiled like a spring. The mother bear at the fence stiffened, scanning every inch of the courtyard with the precision of a guardian alert to any hint of danger. Margaret felt her heart pound. The cub's trust and the delicate equilibrium of the courtyard were about to be tested once again. From behind a small cluster of rose bushes emerged a stray dog. It was medium-sized, with shaggy fur matted in places, a collar dangling loosely around its neck. Its approach was hesitant, tail low but wagging slightly, curiosity and caution mingling. The cub let out a soft whimper and took a cautious step backward, pressing gently into Margaret's legs. The mother bear growled softly, a low rumble warning the intruder to respect the boundaries of the cub's space. Margaret instinctively knelt lower, hand hovering over the cub in a protective yet non-threatening gesture. "It's okay, stay calm. We're here," she whispered. Rosa mirrored her tone, speaking softly from her wheelchair. The residents held their breaths, understanding that any sudden movement from them or the dog could trigger a reaction from the cub or the mother bear. Nurse James stepped forward subtly, signaling to the rescue team to maintain distance but be ready to intervene. The dog paused mid-step, sniffing the air, and then slowly backed away, uncertain yet drawn to the cub. Margaret noticed the cub's instincts shift, fear mixed with curiosity, a delicate balance that required careful observation. "Gentle, gentle," she murmured, guiding the cub without forcing it to move. The mother bear's posture reflected her protective nature. She did not approach the dog aggressively but remained a formidable presence along the fence, muscles tensed and eyes fixed on the new visitor. The cub, sensing both threat and safety simultaneously, moved cautiously closer to Margaret's hand, brushing lightly against her fingers as if seeking reassurance. The residents, though tense, began to act with a newfound sense of responsibility. Rosa suggested placing a small barrier of flower pots between the cub and the dog's approach, creating a subtle shield without cornering the animal. George quietly hummed a calming tune, while Mr. Thompson whispered softly about the cub's bravery. Every resident's action, however small, contributed to maintaining a calm and secure environment. The dog, curious but hesitant, sniffed at the flower pots. The cub, encouraged by Margaret's calm presence, ventured a tentative step toward the fruit tray, still glancing warily at the dog. The mother bear's growl softened slightly, signaling cautious observation rather than aggression. Margaret realized how much the cub had learned in hours of interaction. Trust, patience, and reading subtle cues from humans and other animals alike. Minutes passed in careful equilibrium. The dog, sensing no threat from the humans but recognizing the mother bear's presence, eventually moved along the fence line and trotted away down the pathway. The cub relaxed, its muscles releasing tension, ears flicking in relief. Margaret let out a slow exhale, realizing the courtyard's harmony had endured yet another test. The residents, sensing relief, began to smile quietly, exchanging looks that spoke of shared accomplishment. "We kept calm," Rosa whispered, "and it worked." Margaret nodded, observing the cub nuzzle her hand lightly, a tiny act of trust that symbolized resilience, courage, and the rewards of patience. The mother bear, still alert but relaxed along the fence, shifted slightly to nuzzle the cub, a gentle affirmation that the human's presence was safe. Margaret noticed the subtle communication. No words, just mutual understanding between species. It was a moment of profound connection, bridging instinct, trust, and human empathy. As the sun dipped lower, casting golden hues across the courtyard, Margaret reflected on the lessons of the day. The cub had experienced fear, hesitation, and curiosity, yet with careful guidance and consistent calm from humans, it had navigated each challenge successfully. The residents, too, had discovered strength, patience, and empathy, realizing that small, deliberate actions could profoundly affect those around them, human or animal. Even as calm settled, the courtyard felt alive with vigilance. Margaret observed subtle cues in the cub's posture: ears flicking, nose twitching, tail moving slightly. The mother bear mirrored these movements, a living lesson in attunement and responsiveness. Residents continued to watch quietly, understanding that trust required continuous care, attention, and respect for the cub's instincts. Suddenly, a faint breeze stirred, carrying the scent of the nearby forest beyond the nursing home grounds. The cub's ears perked, eyes widening slightly, and it trotted a few steps toward the mother bear at the fence. Margaret followed carefully, hand outstretched but not imposing. The mother bear lowered her head, allowing the cub to brush against her side, and Margaret realized the subtle miracle of coexistence. Trust, patience, and empathy had created a space where humans and animals could safely interact. The courtyard, once a simple space for morning routines, had transformed into a theater of resilience and connection. The cub had become a teacher as much as a learner, demonstrating courage, adaptation, and the capacity for trust. The residents had grown alongside it, discovering dormant strength and empathy within themselves. Margaret smiled softly, understanding that these lessons would linger long after the cub and its mother returned to the forest. Just as the sun dipped completely behind the trees, a distant noise carried through the courtyard, the unmistakable sound of wheels rolling and metal clanging. Someone new was approaching. Would this be a test the cub could face calmly, or would the delicate balance of trust and patience be challenged once again? If a vulnerable animal experiences repeated surprises or potential threats, how would you maintain its trust and your calm? Could continuous patience and empathy truly prevent fear from escalating? The sound of wheels clanging against the pavement grew louder, echoing through the quiet courtyard. The cub froze instantly, ears pinned, tiny body pressing against Margaret's legs. Its mother stiffened along the fence, muscles rippling with tension. Margaret felt a familiar surge of adrenaline. The cub's trust and the fragile peace of the courtyard were about to face another test. From the driveway beyond the main gate, a maintenance cart rolled slowly toward the courtyard, carrying 2 workers and a stack of equipment. They had not realized the cub and mother bear were nearby. The cub's eyes widened, dark and alert, muscles coiled like springs, ready to react to any sudden movement. The mother bear growled low and deep, a rumble that resonated through the courtyard, warning both cub and humans alike. Margaret leaned closer, hand hovering protectively over the cub. "It's okay, stay calm. We're here," she whispered. Rosa echoed her, soft and steady. The residents held their breath, collectively aware that any sudden gesture could trigger a reaction. Every eye was fixed on the approaching cart, the cub, and its vigilant mother. Nurse James signaled the staff to remain calm and position themselves subtly between the cub and the approaching vehicle, ready to guide or intervene only if absolutely necessary. George whispered to Mr. Thompson, "Remember, patience and calm, that's how we've managed every test so far." Mr. Thompson nodded, softening his tone, narrating quietly to the cub as though the words themselves could reassure. The cub, sensing both potential threat and the steady presence of trusted humans, took a tentative step toward Margaret's hand. Its ears flicked toward the cart, then back to the mother bear, reading the situation instinctively. Margaret realized the delicate balance of instinct, trust, and calm guidance at play. One wrong step, from the humans or the maintenance team, could shatter hours of careful work. The mother bear's stance was protective yet non-confrontational. She remained along the fence, eyes fixed on the cart, muscles ready but restrained. The cub, encouraged by Margaret's presence, inched forward cautiously, brushing lightly against her fingers before returning to sniff at the flower beds. The residents' quiet presence reinforced calm, each of them contributing subtly to the atmosphere of reassurance. The maintenance workers slowed, noticing the cub and its mother. One whispered to the other and both halted their cart, eyes wide. Margaret and Nurse James stepped forward slowly, hands raised in calm gestures, speaking softly to direct attention away from sudden movements. "Please take it slow. There's a bear cub here," Margaret said gently but firmly. "No sudden gestures. The cub and its mother are watching carefully." The cub's instincts responded immediately. It pressed closer to Margaret's hand, ears flicking, tail low but moving in slight curiosity. The mother bear, sensing the human's calm and the cub's response, allowed the approach to continue. Margaret realized the incredible adaptability of trust. how it could endure repeated challenges if guided patiently and consistently. Minutes passed in careful tension. The cart stopped at a safe distance, the workers frozen but cooperative. Margaret whispered, "It's okay, stay calm. Everything's fine." Rosa added her soft encouragement, while George hummed gently. Mr. Thompson narrated the scene quietly, noting the cub's bravery and patience. The courtyard, a microcosm of cooperation and empathy, seemed to hold its collective breath. The cub, now fully reassured by Margaret and the residents' calm presence, ventured further into the open courtyard. It sniffed at a small pile of fruit, pausing occasionally to glance at the approaching cart, then back at Margaret. Its mother remained a constant sentinel, growl now softened, muscles relaxed but alert. Margaret realized that this was a profound lesson in courage, for the cub, the humans, and even the residents alike. The maintenance workers, observing the cub's cautious exploration and the mother's calm yet watchful posture, began to back the cart slowly, signaling restraint and respect. Margaret and Nurse James guided them verbally, reinforcing slow, non-threatening movements. The cub and its mother responded in kind, allowing the humans and other animals to coexist safely within the courtyard. The residents, inspired by the cub's courage and their own role in maintaining calm, began to exchange quiet smiles. Margaret glanced around at each of them, Rosa, George, Mr. Thompson, realizing how much this tiny creature had transformed their understanding of empathy, responsibility, and patience. Each small gesture, a soft word, a calm hand, a steady presence, had contributed to the cub's sense of safety and trust. As the sun began to dip toward the horizon, casting long shadows across the courtyard, Margaret observed the subtle shifts in the cub's posture. Ears flicking, nose twitching, tail brushing gently along the ground, signs of curiosity mixed with vigilance. The mother bear mirrored each movement, a living lesson in attentiveness and instinctual guidance. Margaret realized that trust, once earned, required constant care, attention, and respect for natural instincts. The maintenance cart finally passed through the courtyard and continued down the pathway, leaving the cub and its mother in peace. The courtyard exhaled collectively, the tension dissipating into relief and quiet celebration. The cub brushed against Margaret's hand once more, its small, dark eyes reflecting recognition and appreciation. The mother bear lowered her head slightly, a subtle affirmation of calm and trust. The residents, smiles widening, began to speak quietly among themselves. "We kept calm," Rosa whispered. "And it worked," Margaret replied. Mr. Thompson, always dramatic, simply nodded, his expression softened, a quiet acknowledgement of the day's lessons. George added softly, "It's amazing what patience, empathy, and calm can achieve." Margaret looked at the cub and its mother, realizing that this small, vulnerable creature had not only taught courage and trust but had also reinvigorated human empathy and community. The courtyard, once quiet and routine, had become a place of learning, connection, and shared resilience. Just as the sun disappeared behind the trees, a sudden rustle came from the woods beyond the nursing home's edge. Was the cub's day of learning and trust complete, or would another test of courage and empathy arrive before nightfall? The sun had finally disappeared behind the distant trees, leaving the courtyard bathed in the soft, warm glow of early evening. Shadows stretched long across the flower beds, the wooden benches, and the familiar pathways that had become a stage for an extraordinary day. Margaret watched the cub, now moving freely near the center of the courtyard, its small paws stirring gently among the flower petals. Its mother remained vigilant along the fence, muscles relaxed but alert, a constant reminder of instinctive care. The residents leaned back in their wheelchairs and chairs, a quiet calm settling over them. Rosa whispered softly, "It feels like we've been part of something bigger today." George nodded, adding, "We weren't just watching, we were protecting, guiding, and learning alongside them." Even Mr. Thompson, who had narrated the day's events like a storyteller in his prime, now simply smiled, eyes reflecting awe and contemplation. Margaret crouched beside the cub, fingers brushing softly along its fur. The cub tilted its head, sniffing her hand, then pressed gently against her palm, a subtle sign of trust, recognition, and connection. Margaret's heart swelled. In those small, simple gestures lay the culmination of hours of empathy, patience, and careful guidance. The cub had grown comfortable in the human presence, but its instincts remained intact, reminding everyone that trust, once earned, must be continually respected. The mother bear shifted slightly, lowering her head to touch the cub's back with a soft nuzzle. Margaret noticed the subtle interplay of communication, a lesson in attentiveness, mutual respect, and natural instinct. The cub, reassured by its mother and the humans alike, began to explore the flowerbeds again, sniffing at petals, occasionally glancing toward Margaret and the residents as if inviting them into its small world. Rosa reached out and placed a gentle hand on the cub's fur, careful not to startle it. "We did well today," she whispered. Margaret smiled and nodded, realizing the truth in Rosa's words. The residents had faced challenges alongside the cub and its mother, unexpected sounds, movements, and visitors, yet they had maintained calm, demonstrated empathy, and supported one another. In doing so, they had not only protected a vulnerable creature but also rekindled dormant strengths within themselves. The courtyard, quiet except for soft rustling of leaves and the occasional distant bird call, seemed to acknowledge the day's events. Margaret observed how each resident had contributed meaningfully: George's gentle humming, Mr. Thompson's narration, Rosa's soothing words, and even Nurse James' calm, guiding presence. Together, they had created an environment where a bear cub could explore safely, a mother could remain protective without panic, and humans could rediscover patience, courage, and empathy. Margaret glanced at the cub, noting the subtle shifts in its behavior. It had grown bolder yet remained cautious, demonstrating the lessons it had learned: trust, observation, and careful engagement with the world around it. Its mother mirrored this growth, more relaxed now yet still watchful, a living testament to the balance of instinct and learned safety. A soft breeze carried the scent of the nearby woods, and the cub paused, ears flicking. Margaret held her breath, aware that this was the cub's reminder of the larger world beyond the courtyard, a world of forests, paths, and freedom. The mother bear lowered her head, allowing the cub to glance toward the open space beyond the fence. The moment was quiet but profound, a balance of connection, independence, and respect for natural boundaries. The residents, sensing the significance, became still. Margaret whispered, "Look, it's learning that it can explore safely but still return to the people who care for it." Rosa nodded, soft tears glinting in her eyes. "It's not just the cub that's learning, we are too." Margaret turned toward the courtyard benches where residents sat, noticing how transformed they seemed. Today had been more than observing wildlife, it had been a lesson in empathy, vigilance, and the impact of calm, deliberate action. They had discovered that care is an active process, requiring attention, patience, and respect, qualities they could carry into their own lives and relationships. As twilight deepened, the mother bear nudged the cub toward the fence, a gentle reminder that the world beyond was still vast and important. The cub hesitated for a moment, then returned once more to Margaret's hand, brushing softly against her fingers. Margaret felt a swell of gratitude. This small creature had taught them all that connection transcends boundaries, species, and fears. Nurse James quietly observed from the side, impressed by how seamlessly humans and animals had coexisted today. The cub had demonstrated adaptability, the mother had exercised protective instincts without panic, and the residents had offered patience, empathy, and guidance. Together they had crafted a microcosm of trust, learning, and harmony. Margaret watched as the cub finally trotted back toward its mother at the fence. The mother bear sniffed the air, then nuzzled the cub gently, acknowledging the safety of the humans while guiding its offspring. The cub paused briefly to glance at Margaret and Rosa, a subtle gesture of farewell and appreciation. Then it stepped toward the forest beyond the fence, moving with cautious confidence, mother close behind. The courtyard fell silent again, now filled not with tension but with reflection. The residents exchanged glances, smiles, and quiet murmurs. Margaret whispered to Rosa, "We'll always remember this day, and what they taught us." Rosa nodded, a soft, wistful smile on her face. Patience, trust, connection. Even the smallest creatures can teach the biggest lessons. Mr. Thompson, breaking the silence, finally said aloud, "They've left more than memories here, they've left lessons that will stay with us forever." George added softly, "And courage." We all discovered courage today in different ways. Margaret looked around at the courtyard, at the residents, and at the space that had become a stage for an extraordinary interaction between humans and animals. She realized the day had been a shared journey, a series of tests, challenges, and calm decisions that had strengthened bonds and illuminated the power of empathy. Compassion, patience, and empathy are not confined to human relationships alone. Trust, once earned, is fragile yet resilient. By respecting natural instincts, acting with care, and maintaining calm in the face of challenges, humans and animals alike can form bonds that teach courage, kindness, and the enduring value of connection. What lessons about patience, empathy, and trust have you learned from animals in your life? How might observing or caring for a vulnerable creature change your perspective on human relationships?